Man, Banjo Kazooie is so sick. It's just one of those games you can sit down and jam out with on any day at any time and have a good time doing so. It's nothing massively deep or intricate, but sometimes you just want a simple game to play while you turn off your brain and imagine a life where you aren't playing a children's game after a 12-hour shift at your minimum wage job. There's this new meme that's been emerging over the past few years that Banjo Kazooie was never good. And the notion that it's an amazing game was misinformation propagated by Nintendotubers as an elaborate psyop for the purpose of... And it's just funny to me as someone who played this game on a whim randomly one day as a kid and ended up absolutely loving it with zero influence from the internet whatsoever. Just my dad telling me it's good. I guess he was in on the scheme as well. But while I can sit here and scoff at the theory that there's a cabal of content creators controlling the reputation of a 25-year-old N64 game, I have to grant that there may be some amount of credence to that idea. Not that there was an actual concerted effort to turn Banjo Kazooie into the cultural zeitgeist in order to raise jiggy stocks. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. The truth is a lot simpler and not as conspiratorial. A lot of people who happened to make popular YouTube reviews loved Banjo Kazooie and made videos about how much they loved it.
Only 90s gamers will ever know what this video game is. That's it.
These videos, unrestrained in their praise for the game, are viewed by mostly impressionable kids, and so said kids grow up respecting Banjo as the masterpiece the YouTubers told them it was, even if they hadn't necessarily played it themselves. And so in turn, they start praising Banjo Kazooie, and the overall modern reputation of the game just keeps swelling and swelling, and then that leads some people to try the game after hearing the fucking fables about its eminence, expecting it to blow their cocks off, and are disappointed when it turns out to just be a fun little game. It's a similar situation to Ocarina of Time, where it's a damn fine title, but the fact that it's revered as a perfect masterpiece GOAT of all time inflates people's expectations for the game to unreasonable levels. See, I'm a big Banjo Kazooie mark, but speaking objectively, it's just good. Great even, I'd say, but I don't think it goes too far beyond that. Masterpiece? Tooie is the masterpiece, and even then that has a cornucopia of issues itself. What Banjo Kazooie is remarkably solid. It does what it wants to very well and doesn't have any particular glaring problems. It's difficult to wrap your head around, especially if you were born after it came out like me, but try and think back to how revolutionary this game must have been when it came out. I certainly would have considered it a masterpiece had I played it in 1998 with only the games that came before it to measure it against. But while I do think Banjo Kazooie has aged strikingly well, I wouldn't personally shower it with such lofty praise in the current year. People also constantly attack the popularity of the game and try and claim it's not as iconic as people make it out to be, and while that's easily disprovable in a post-Smash appearance world, I'm not going to bother because who gives a shit how popular a game is if it's good? So while I did find the idea that popular creators can skew the community perception of a game to such a degree laughable at first, after thinking about it a bit more, it does make some sense. Like, I think back to when I was a kid watching YouTube at way too young an age, and I remember just blindly accepting what my favourite creators said, even if deep down I didn't agree. A particular example I remember was Some Call Me Johnny's review of Shadow the Hedgehog, where he said the music was unmemorable. That's valid, I mean it's his opinion after all, but as a kid, I loved the Shadow OST, and I still thought to myself, yeah, true, when I watched his review back then. Because I didn't know how to think for myself yet. Subconsciously, I knew that I didn't agree, but I didn't have the ability to articulate it, so I just thought I was wrong, I guess. Hell, coming up with my own perspectives wasn't something I was even able to do until my mid to late teens, and even still it can be difficult to have confidence in my opinions to this day, especially if they go against the grain of what the community at large thinks. God help me whenever I end up making a video about a Sonic game, those people will fucking kill me. Honestly, I think a lot of people never get the ability to think for themselves and succumb to the overwhelming pressure of feeling like they have to agree with people they deem smart or likable. So while I don't think Banjo Kazooie is undeserving of praise in the slightest, I do think that YouTubers can significantly influence the broader gaming community's perception of a game and ultimately end up warping its reputation as a result. Case in point, Banjo Kazooie nuts and bolts. This game is good. Straight up. It's not amazing, doesn't really come close to the first two games, but it's far from bad. And if you're a more casual Banjo enjoyer, or someone whose knowledge of the franchise is based on social osmosis, you may have just raised an eyebrow. Because this game has managed to carve out a name for itself in the pantheon of god-awful franchise-ruining dogshit game sequels. It's right up there next to Sonic 06 and another example I'll think of by the time I record this voiceover. Like, this game will catch strays completely unprompted, and the tales of how terrible it is are like a gaming legend. Oh shit. I dropped my IGN review that gave it an 8.3 out of 10. Huh. There's an 8.5 from GameSpot. Giant Bomb gave it 5 stars, you don't get much better than that. Even its aggregated score on Metacritic is a respectable 79. I don't get it. I thought this game sucked cocks in hell. What's going on? Well, what if an incredibly popular and influential content creator made a video that unceremoniously shat on this game, and that video got 16 million views? What might happen then? Now don't take this the wrong way, as far as I'm concerned that review is still a slice of fried gold, but let's have it right. It is super biased, super exaggerated, and super personal. And that's likely the point. JonTron is a comedian first and game reviewer second. I mean shit, he doesn't even cover video games anymore. This probably wasn't ever supposed to be a serious critique of Nail and Bale. But do you think every one of those 16 million views got the memo? Especially among what we can assume were a fuck ton of literal children? Many of whom have probably grown up now and never played the game but still remember the video? You see what I'm getting at. But I mean, watch the actual footage of the game in John's video. Do you notice anything? It's all Showdown Town and Nutty Acres. We cannot be taking the word of a man who didn't play past the first level as gospel. I never played through Squirt and Divert properly as a kid myself. I mainly just mucked around in my older brother's completed save file building complete monstrosities, but I did always have fun in the game and I played it a lot. But even still, I remember watching the JonTron review back in the day and I was just like, well, I guess the game is bad. All that being said, to pin this game's bad reputation entirely on one guy's YouTube video is stupid, because it's wrong. Pretty much like how it's stupid to pin Banjo Kazooie's good reputation entirely on YouTube videos as well. But it sure didn't help considering roughly 16 times more people have watched the video than bought the game. Regardless, a lot of the negativity surrounding the game also seems to be leftover grief from the game's release. The major shift in gameplay from 3D platforming to driving shopping trolleys was not welcomed by more or less the entire fanbase. Couple that with contentious redesigns of the characters and you have an internet shitstorm on your hands, my friend. While the hardcore Banjo fanbase has softened on Common Run considerably in the past few years, the embers left over from the initial backlash still leave this game's reputation firmly in the shitter. But after revisiting it recently, I can say with absolute confidence that the hate is really overblown. Like, it's actually silly. That's right, I said it. It's silly. This game, while no masterpiece by any stretch of the imagination, isn't the crime against morality people make it out to be. In fact, it's actually pretty darn fun. Splash and Dash has been torn apart, shat on, bulldozed, and had its carcass molested at this point, and while I think a lot of the criticisms leveled at it are absolutely fair, I don't want to add to it because there's nothing really of value I can add to that conversation anymore. Instead, I want to give the game its flowers with this video, and talk about all the stuff I think it did succeed in, and why, despite its flaws, it's a genuinely solid title. But before I glaze this game's blocky vehicle dick for the rest of the video, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about why this game is so controversial. While there's a lot of smaller things the game is criticised for, there are really two main cardinal sins at the forefront of it all. First of all, an entirely new art direction was taken for this game, and the entire cast got redesigned with less than stellar results. I mean, to be fair, I do like a handful of these designs. Bowles and Grunty look totally fine, I like Jolly Roger and Humber's outfits a lot better, and Mumbo genuinely looks great. In fact, to this day, this is my favourite 3D model of him, he's so cute. But you've also got cases like Boggy, the Jinjos, and Klungo. Jesus Christ, get that off screen, there's kids watching. Probably. But the big issue here is that Banjo and Kazooie themselves fall on the shitty side of the redesign spectrum. Well, actually, I don't mind how Kazooie looks in a lot of instances, but yeah, Banjo looks pretty fucking bad. I mean, shit, in some instances he looks like a goddamn Five Nights at Freddy's monster. It's the kind of thing where you do get used to it over time, and then you might find yourself thinking that you may even like it. Until you see their N64 designs at a glance somewhere and get sad all over again. If I had to guess, the new blocky designs were just a product of the art style that Rare had been developing at the time, but to change these iconic characters' appearances so drastically just comes across as insecure, as if they thought the charming classic Banjo look was outdated and wouldn't appeal to people after the 8 entire years between installments. And that might as well transition me into my next point and my personal biggest issue with Spunk and Dunk. It feels like it's embarrassed that it even exists. In all fairness, this is basically confined to the first half hour or so of the game, but the self-deprecating humour and complete lack of confidence in itself just comes across as a bit desperate. They're all fat and washed up and no one plays this gay cartoon shit anymore anyway, man. What were we thinking making a fucking Banjo Kazooie game? I mean, it's like they knew, because let's be real, they must have, that Banjo had no place on Xbox, that it wouldn't sell well. Which it didn't. But again, we're talking about a few lines of dialogue from this log prick at the start of the game here. So while it's definitely a bit cringeworthy, it doesn't really matter that much once the actual game starts. And speaking of the actual game, let's address the second and biggest sin Pumperdump committed. The single reason for its legendary infamy. Vehicles. It is not a collectathon. It is not a platformer. It's not even a Bastardvania. It's a game where you build cars and you drive them. So am I going to sit here and tell you that the vehicle gameplay is somehow an ingenious evolution of the core Banjo gameplay, and it's actually secretly a logical continuation from where the series left off with Tooie? No, they shouldn't have done it. It should have been Banjo 3E. I mean, let's set the scene. Banjo 2E ends with the usual sequel stinger, just you wait until Banjo 3E, and then in 2002, Rareware gets bought out by Microsoft. Okay, so it won't be on Nintendo, but 3E is still happening, right? And then there ain't shit for 4 years until 2006, where a teaser trailer finally reveals that Banjo and Kazooie are coming back. Yeah, they look like they've been kept in an ice cube tray all these years, but hey, there's notes, there's honeycombs, there's a Jiggy that's the complete wrong shape, looks like Banjo Kazooie to me. But then they show more of the game in other trailers, and it's all cars, and driving, and flying, and swimming, in a boat. Yeah man, I'd be pissed. It's not what anyone wanted, and I can't in any good faith say that the backlash wasn't justifiable. They should have made it a platformer, a proper follow-up to the N64 games. But here's the thing. They didn't. And that is just the timeline that we're in. The game is 15 years old. We've been given time enough to accept it for what it is. There's no sense in still being butthurt about it not being a more traditional sequel. And consider this, the game is lamented for having vehicle construction gameplay. Not for having bad vehicle construction gameplay. It is controversial solely for these meta reasons that exist outside of the game itself. Blow and Go's building mechanics are actually surprisingly robust and intuitive, which, with something as freeform as this, is not an easy feat to achieve. You're given a mess of tools at your disposal, and if you can think it, you can pretty much build it, which comes into play magnificently with all the different mission objectives. While there are usually uniform, intended methods for completing these different challenges, a lot of the fun I had with the Ram and Scram was experimenting with my options and seeing what kind of abomination vehicle thing I could come up with to most efficiently break the mission. It's similar to how 2E lets you approach some jiggies from a variety of different ways by using your skill set creatively. But while those were mostly exploits, Whack 'n Pack seems to actively encourage this kind of bonkers outside-the-box thinking, with missions having any number of different ways you could go about completing them, as well as rewarding the player for doing it as quickly as possible with leaderboard placings and TT trophies, which netting 4 off gains you an extra jiggy. It got to the point where I was making shitty one-off cars for almost every damn mission. I need to knock over a bunch of dominoes? Let me make this piece of garbage scooping thing with an extremely high acceleration. Water polo with Grunty? How about a boat version of it? Oh god, this mission where I have to dogfight these Grunty bots to protect a golden egg is fucking impossible, even with my least shit fighter plane. Why don't I just build this big fuck-off hollow cube helicopter thingy and use it as a barrier for the egg? Yeah, get through that, you fucking cunts. It's not even just limited to what you can do with your vehicles, you can often use the objects related to the mission itself in creative ways, like this one Nutty Acres jiggy, where the idea is that you bring a bunch of nuts over to this nut-sucking machine, but you can actually just detach the sucking mechanism and taxi it over to where all the nuts are and suck them all up at once. This joke is too obvious, I'm not doing it. I suppose the natural foil to this kind of thing is that the game is relying on the player's own creativity to be engaging, and some people are just going to be able to tap into that more than others. This is especially a problem around the start of the game, where your selection of vehicle parts is extremely limited and kneecaps a lot of the ideas for builds you might have. Even though I'm an artist, I do often struggle to come up with inventive stuff in games like this, and I was worried my playthrough would be hampered by that. But the way you gradually obtain more parts to try out naturally inspired me to try new things, and most times, they worked out astonishingly well. Most times. Occasionally the game will have missions with specific set vehicles for you to use, which could also work to circumvent a possible lack of inspiration. Well, in theory. But these forced vehicles are absolutely fucking terrible. Every single time. Piss off! Not again! Stop! No! There was one mission in particular in Banjo Land, the game's third world set in a museum dedicated to the first 2 games, where you had to entertain the place's small handful of guests by doing some vehicle stunts and tricks. Okay, cool. But the game forces this shit fucking bike on you, and it just controls so badly. I swear to god I damn near had a nervous breakdown getting the TT trophy on this mission, and when I finally did I decided to look it up on YouTube and see how other people managed. What else do I find but a video where someone used the on-the-fly vehicle modifications to Frankenstein this pikey fucking bike into an entirely different thing. Makes a lot of sense. So instead of the pre-made vehicles serving as inspiration for your own, instead I took it as a challenge to create something that wasn't so god-awful to pilot. So it was a bit of a roundabout method, but I suppose it achieved a similar goal. Seriously though, these preset vehicle missions are the absolute pits, and if you give this game a go, I'd recommend skipping as many of them as you can. And you can probably beat the game without doing a single one. I haven't tested that because I'm not an insane person, but it's probably possible. Once you get over the initial hump, the game opens up considerably and establishes this really great non-linear pacing. At any given time, you have several of the game's worlds open to you, all of which have 6 acts that have a varying amount of missions to complete inside. Maybe you get tired of one level and decide to hop over to another one for a bit. Or perhaps you get tired of missions in general and want to explore the extensive overworld for a little while to find mumbo crates which are scattered all over the place and house vehicle parts. Hell, maybe you'll want to workshop some new vehicle ideas with the parts you find. You're free to do any of these things at your own leisure, and there's this great sense of progression as you get more jiggies and parts that just keeps you playing for hours on end. Seriously, it takes a lot for a game to pull me in these days, but one of my recording sessions was over 4 hours long, and only 2.5 of those were me idling while getting a blowjob. I definitely do think the pool of different objectives is a little small, leading to a lot of derivative missions that amount to the same ideas the game has already repeated several times already, but I don't really mind because it gives me the chance to iterate on some of my old vehicles and create better versions of them with the new parts I've acquired from progressing through the game. Now on the subject of controls, I don't think they're perfect. Far from it in fact, I still hadn't mastered them by the end of my playthrough and had more than my share of frustration from how janky it can be at times. It ain't Mario Kart, that's for sure. But at the same time, I can't bring myself to be too critical of them either. It sounds like a total cop-out, but the fact that this game controls weird just adds to its charm for me. Fuck me. I just want to get my god... Ah. Well... That's not quite what I wanted, but oh fuck it, I guess we'll follow the river now. It's probably my sense of humour being completely rotted by social media at this point, but I can't help but laugh at all the metallic impact sounds while Banjo desperately tries to drive in a straight line up a hill but keeps colliding with the guardrails. Bet you sure miss Talon Trot right now. Who needs a Talon Trot when I have this awesome car? Fuck yeah. Rev the Bugatti too hard. Now I'll freely admit that this isn't a very valid argument, and there were definitely moments where the jank stopped being funny and I just wanted to be able to be in control properly for once. But then I'd drive off the side of a cliff and my car would totally eat shit and it'd be hilarious. Let's fucking go! A lot of the funniness can be attributed to the physics engine. This game uses the Havoc engine to have pretty decent physics for the time. Like yeah, there was still revolutionary stuff like Half-Life 2 before this game, but it's clear a lot of work went into fine-tuning the physics to work in tandem with the vehicle building. Piss. Piss and shit. No. Fucking... Oh. No, not in the fucking water, Banjo. Fuck. Oh, damn it. What is happening? What is Help! It's a credit to Gush 'n' Rush's mechanical depth that The Legend of Zelda Tears of Great Britain often got compared to it with its similar construction and physics-based gameplay 14 years later. And if you're wondering if you can create a giant cock machine in this game as well? Course you fucking can! Let's talk about the game's visuals. You know, leaving the questionable aesthetic choices aside, I was actually pretty taken aback by how good looking this game is. By 2008, most companies had gotten a pretty firm grasp on the 7th gen hardware, so I'm not saying that Ejaculate and Excavate... Oh, you know what, this joke wasn't even funny the first time. I'm not saying that Nuts and Bolts is a particular graphical outlier, but I do think this game still holds up really well under modern lens. The patchwork style was and still is an unusual design choice, but for what it is, it's executed remarkably well, making everything pleasing to the eye. And the lighting is also pretty impressive for the time. The game overall strikes a nice balance between cartoony and realistic, almost reminding me of Mario Kart 8. You know, before they lazily ported a bunch of shite from the phone game that completely clashed with the base game's art style. Shit! Although I should mention one thing that's kind of off-putting. The game's worlds are like fuck scaled up to accommodate for all the vehicles and stuff, and so one of the consequences of that is objects and even NPCs being absolutely massive and just hype-mugging the shit out of Banjo.
Mindless, when will they ever learn?
But good lord, I haven't even mentioned one of the objective best attributes of Nuts and Bolts. That fucking music, son! This game's soundtrack is absolutely incredible. You got the fucking... and Showdown Time with the... And then you go to Mumbos to build a car and it's all boom, 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 and then you do one of those dumb fucking Jinjo challenges, but it's okay because you get to hear the... And then you fight Grunty and you get hit with the fucking... Seriously, this OST is amazing. The big band orchestra feels like such a natural progression from the N64 soundtracks, and I'd much rather a new Banjo game continue in this direction, rather than trying to recreate the N64 sound with modern software. Actually, you know what, I'm sorry Ukulele, this is fucked up of me. You're not that bad, you're just... not Banjo Kazooie. Well, I mean, actually, you are Banjo Kazooie, and that's the problem. I mean, you even kept the grunting syllable voices that everyone doesn't like anymore, when Nuts and Bolts over here already fixed the issue with dialogue boxes that have preset little voice lines, so that your ears aren't assaulted by a cacophony of grunts or moans or farts anymore. I never hear anyone big it up for that change, what gives? The only criticism I can think of for the music is that it borrows so many melodies from the older games. Every single one of the world themes has some DNA from the older game's tunes sprinkled in, like Hailfire Peak showing up in the Jiggaseems theme, or Mad Monster Mansion in the Terrarium of Terror. But I mean, hey, that could just as easily be considered a positive instead of a negative. It's just a little weird how there's barely any completely original compositions in the game. Even Showdown Town has Jinjo Village's melody tucked into it. But I'm certainly not going to complain about getting to hear glorious orchestral renditions of all these classic banjo tracks. I cannot fucking believe that none of these songs were included in Smash Brothers. I cannot believe. But maybe the most important thing that Nuts and Bolts does, and what was pretty much the catalyst for me making this video, that I feel often gets glossed over is how it keeps the heart of the series alive despite the radical change in gameplay and art style. Every character retains their quirks and charm, and all the dialogue maintains that signature dry, rare wit. Banjo is still well-mannered, easygoing and brave, just as Kazooie is still loud, wisecracking and obnoxious. Hell, they even let Grunty start rhyming again. While it might seem trivial to praise a sequel for maintaining the same tone and characterization as its predecessors, I feel like many franchise installments or reboots that come out after a long break can often lose touch with what made the series so beloved in the first place. Although I did complain about how self-deprecatory the game can be at times, it's nonetheless absolutely jam-packed with references, callbacks and Easter eggs related to the series' history, and evidently has a lot of love for the past installments. I mean, the way this game is dismissed despite preserving the spirit of the franchise just because the gameplay is different makes it seem as if all people want from Banjo Kazooie is the collectathon gameplay and that the characters and worlds are second fiddle to that. I mean, maybe that is the case and I'm just an outlier, but being a collectathon platformer is not what makes or breaks a Banjo Kazooie game for me. It's certainly part of the series' identity, but people seem to forget that even Tooie iterated on the Banjo formula significantly. Again, should it have deviated so heavily from the N64 games? No, to this day it's still kind of a baffling decision. But at the very least it was willing to innovate, which I respect a lot more than just trying to produce a carbon copy of an existing IP. Oh shit, I did it again. You know, I reckon a lot of the negativity surrounding Nuts and Bolts still persists because it's still the latest game in the series. It reviewed very well but didn't sell amazingly, and a lot of people attribute that to Microsoft never touching the franchise again. But I mean, come on, look at the shit Microsoft is pulling these days. Nuts and Bolts could have been the first game to ever sell a gazillion units and they probably still wouldn't have greenlit a sequel. I feel like if Banjo 3 ever did come out, regardless as to whether it was even good or not, all the hate for Nuts and Bolts would quickly evaporate as we'd either finally have the sequel we always wanted, or we'd have a new horse to flog relentlessly. In my video about Banjo Tooie, I mentioned how it seemingly gets swept under the rug in favour of the first game time and again, to the point where it feels like the first Banjo Kazooie is all the series was and will ever be, and Nuts and Bolts suffers the same fate tenfold. I understand why it's treated like a black sheep, I really do, but I honestly think enough time has passed to just accept it for what it is. Because what it is a flawed but super fun and unique little game with a lot of heart that was incredibly ahead of its time. Even after a full playthrough, I still feel like I hadn't scratched the surface with what it's possible to do in this game. Again, the fact that people are calling back to it 15 years later after playing the newest Zelda is a testament to how innovative it truly was. Banjo Kazooie Nuts and Bolts might be the best game that the internet says sucks ever.